I've got a gun. I'm going to kill myself. The front door's open.
Welcome back to another episode of the Officer Nate podcast, ladies and gentlemen. The body camera footage that you're viewing is footage from the body-worn camera of former Officer Ben Darby of the Huntsville Police Department in Alabama on April 3rd, 2018, in the early evening hours. Officer Darby was dispatched to a suicidal subject, during which he shot and killed Jeff Parker. Officer Darby was later indicted and convicted on murder charges. His wife, Keelin Darby, joins us today to speak out on his behalf.
He can shoot you.
Hey, brother.
Put the gun down. Put the gun down.
Hey, brother. Put it down, bro. Put the gun down.
Put it down. I'm not going to tell you again.
Please, please, lower the gun.
44 shots fired.
Huntsville Police, if anyone else is here, come out now.
Give us sort of a synopsis, a breakdown of what happened with Ben on that day, and then we'll sort of unpack it and go through some of the details.
Sure. So on April 3rd, 2018, Ben was working for Huntsville Police Department in patrol on duty, and there was a call dispatched over the radio of a man with a gun who was suicidal. And all the units were busy due to the time of the day it was. And so 2 officers had responded to the call. And on the way to the call, one of the officers asked dispatch to repeat the call notes. So she went ahead and broadcast the call again over the radio. And that officer said, "Are there any other available units?" And when you work in law enforcement or just working with someone closely, you can tell in their voice when something's not quite right.
Yeah.
And Ben recognized that in Officer Beckel's voice. And Ben was busy going to the department to download some body camera footage from his previous call. And he decided that could wait and he was going to go help his fellow officers. So he put himself en route to the call. So officers nationwide, including Huntsville Police Department, are trained when you go to a man with a gun call and they're inside their own home, you surround the house and you call the person out to you. There's no point in going into the house because you don't know what's going on in there, and you can control more of the call on the outside than you are to put yourself at risk going inside the house.
Yeah.
And Ben had answered several calls where the officers had surrounded the house and called the person out to them, and then they were able to handle the situation however they needed to. So that was Ben's mindset going to this call that day. So when he got there, he was the 3rd officer on scene, and with the mindset of having to set up a perimeter, he grabbed his shotgun, department-issued shotgun, and put a slug in it, thinking he would be taking a perimeter shot, which would be more precise if he needed to do so.
Right.
And as he was making his way up to the house, he realized that his 2 fellow officers weren't outside, and he, realizing it was a man with a gun call, he knew that they were in danger, or potentially were in danger. So he gets up to the house and sees that one of the officers is inside the house with no cover and concealment in between her and the individual. And then the other officer is outside the house, kind of standing in the doorway, which we all know is a fatal funnel. So Ben, you can hear him on the body camera say, "He can shoot you, point your gun at him." And the female officer is just talking to the guy. And throughout her conversation with Mr. Parker, she starts to stall. She can't get her words across that what she wants him to do. She's not protecting herself because she's standing in the middle of the house with no cover or concealment. And then she moves herself deeper inside the house. And usually when you're on the scene with an officer and they move deeper inside, that's their silent notification to you is, "Hey, come in here and help me." And so Ben and Officer Beckles both entered the house at that time. And Ben saw Mr. Parker with the gun to his head. And Ben pointed his shotgun at him and said, "Drop the gun." And Parker said, "No, I'm not going to do it," or something to that effect. And Ben said, "I'm not going to tell you again, drop the gun." And as he did that, he shrugged his shoulders and the gun moved forward towards Ben and the other 2 officers. And then Ben neutralized the threat in front of him and saved his life and the other 2 officers' lives that day.
Now, I've seen the body camera footage, and so I know what you're talking about. And the viewers, they'll be able to see it too. And you're absolutely right. When there's a suicidal subject, who's he's threatening suicide with whatever weapon, right?
Mm-hmm.
The procedure, the training, typically is like you said, call them out, have them, talk them into, dropping their weapon, coming outside, negotiating, talking them down, whatever the case is, from behind cover. And if you encounter a suicidal subject who has a gun, you train your weapons on him, and then you retreat back to cover. You don't, like you said, you don't stand inside the doorway. These 2 officers that were already on scene, were they from the same department?
They were from Huntsville Police Department.
Okay.
So they underwent the same training that he did in covering concealment and having your guns drawn on a person who is armed, which neither of them had. They both had them pointed at the ground.
Yeah. So, and when you look at this video, when you watch the video, you can see the guy sitting on the couch. He's got the gun to his head. He can easily, within less than a second, point that gun and fire at the officers.
Right.
And
Nate, you tell me when I'm going to shoot you. Bang.
Yeah. See, I have no idea. And
Right.
even if I have my gun here, which is called, they call the ready position or the safety circle, whatever your agency calls it, I don't have time to react. And even if I did, there is no cover. We're essentially just firing back and forth at each other, and somebody is going to get hit.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm not here. We're not here to necessarily condemn the other 2 officers, but they did put themselves in a very dangerous and precarious situation. And they put Ben in a precarious situation because, like you said, he warned them. He's like, he can shoot you. Get the hell out of the way, is essentially what he was trying to say. And so I feel like he was sort of forced into a situation where he had to go in and literally just tell this guy, drop the gun, because at any moment he could turn it on Ben or the other 2 officers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I was watching the body camera footage, I could hear another female voice. Was there someone else in the house, like this guy's wife or somebody?
So, yeah, his fiance was upstairs, and that was not relayed to Ben at all. So, Officer Peace is the female officer. She asks Parker, I think, is there anyone else in the house? And he tells her that his fiance is. Well, she never relayed that to Officer Beckles to put it out over the radio for everyone else who was responding. Hey, we possibly have a hostage barricade, depending on how this goes.
Well, and that was going to be my point, is that, even if you decide, okay, we're in harm's way right now, we need to retreat outside of the house and call this guy out. Well, if you do that and someone else is in the house, then it could become a hostage situation. The guy could barricade himself in there, and then, worst case scenario, he kills her and kills himself. And then all of the officers are in hot water because they didn't stay inside the house and, like you say, neutralize the threat.
Right.
So it's a very complicated situation. I feel like in watching the video that Ben did the only thing that he possibly could have done in that case, since the other 2 officers clearly, violated protocol, violated policy and procedure, did not adhere to the training that they had received. And so what do you do? I mean, did you just stand outside and wait for your fellow officers to get shot by this guy? I imagine Ben was probably a senior officer to them.
He wasn't. He was actually the youngest out of the 3,
Really?
which, in my opinion, and talking to other police officers, just because your years of service doesn't equate to your knowledge on the job.
Well, it certainly doesn't. I've learned that over my years in law enforcement. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can go through a bunch of training, but if you go to training and you don't pay attention for 20 years, but then you've got a rookie cop or, a 5 or 10 year officer who goes to training and he retains that and trains that on a monthly basis, he's going to be more equipped than the 20-year guy who just goes there to get his credit for the year and be gone.
And I can understand, and I don't want anybody to misunderstand that, these officers were trying to talk this guy down, but there is a time and a place and a tactical way to do that where you don't put yourself in danger, you don't put your other officers in danger. And standing inside the doorway of this house where a guy is sitting probably, 20 feet maybe, it's hard to tell because of the body camera footage, but probably 20, 25 feet away, with nothing, with no obstructions, no cover, anything like that you can protect yourself with in case this guy decides to start shooting.
Mm-hmm.
I can understand having compassion for a suicidal subject or for someone with a mental illness, whatever this guy was going through. But again, you have to protect yourself, and you can't put other officers at risk by putting yourself at risk, because they feel like now they have to, it's incumbent upon them to sort of follow you in there. And even if it's just to protect you, because you're not following policy and procedure and training, now they have to go in and make sure you don't get killed because you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing in that case.
Right. And prior to Ben getting there, Parker was given multiple commands to drop the gun. Ben got there, immediately said, put the gun down, he can shoot you. And then he goes in the house and tells Parker to put the gun down 2 more times. So Ben gave him a total of 3 commands to put the gun down. An act is either making an action or not acting at all. And he chose to not act and not follow instructions 7 times. It comes down to what we learn in kindergarten. You follow directions and everything works out. Regardless of if you don't agree with it or not, Parker called police. He called 911 and said, I've got a gun. I'm going to kill myself. The front door's open.
Yeah.
Any cop knows that's going to be an ambush or a potentially deadly situation because he's inviting you into his house.
Yeah.
If they would have followed their training and not gone, if the original 2 officers would have followed their training and not gone into the house, Parker could very well be alive today and Ben wouldn't be in prison.
And so these officers, they didn't realize at the time, none of the officers, from what I understand, if I'm understanding correctly, that his fiance was inside the house before they got there.
Correct. At the time of the call, when it was dispatched, they only knew that Parker was the only individual inside.
Which means they should have, like you say, stand outside behind their patrol cars, behind the engine block, calling out to this guy.
Right.
Now, again, I feel like, other than Ben going to prison, this probably went down the way that it should have, because like we've established, his fiance was inside the house, even though they didn't know it at the time. But we know that now. And we very well could have ended up with a hostage situation with the fiance ending up dead.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this was a suicide by cop, no matter how you slice it. Like, this guy wanted the cops to shoot him. He calls the police and says, I'm going to blow my brains out. The front door is open. He wasn't going to drop the gun, no matter how many commands they gave him, and that was apparent. So, like you said, all it took, I mean, he may have been getting ready to point that gun right at the cops, like, go ahead and shoot me, because he doesn't want to do it himself. He doesn't have the balls to do it himself, but he wants the cops to do it. And that happens all the time. And I feel like, in watching the footage and hearing what you have to say, that's exactly what happened in this case. And Parker was going to make sure that there was no other outcome other than that.
Right. And it was during the trial, we had a witness who was a neighbor that lived on the same street as Parker. And he had come forward to testify of several conversations that he had with Parker about how Parker hated police officers and how he had a plan to lure a police officer into his home and to kill them. And that's exactly what he was trying to do that day. And
okay, so speaking of the trial, so Ben was cleared by his department. His department said, you followed policy and procedure. This was justified, no violations, none of that. But then you had a DA apparently who thought differently, convened a grand jury. He was indicted and then convicted. I mean, what was the evidence? What was it that the DA presented in this case that convinced the jury to render a guilty verdict? So
it was the lack of evidence that wasn't allowed to be brought in to defend Ben. So first off, it happened April 3rd of 2018. They had the incident review board 2 weeks later. By the end of April, everyone was cut loose, put back on the street in full capacity, except the other 2 officers had to go through remedial training for lack of threat assessment. Ben did not. By the end of May, we found out that the district attorney was going to indict him and convene a grand jury and try and get him indicted. Mm-hmm. He was successful in doing so. So August 3rd of 2018, Ben was formally arrested and charged with murder, booked into the Madison County Jail, and then we paid his bond. We had to wait until May of 2021 for a trial because of COVID and shutting down everything. When Ben was arrested, when he was charged and arrested, the Huntsville Police Department, chief of police, the mayor, city council, everyone came out and said, we support Ben Darby. He's not a murderer. That was at a press conference, several press conferences in the city. The district attorney comes out and says, no, he is a murderer. He's a horrible person. He killed an innocent life, blah, blah, blah. And so the judge says, I'm issuing a gag order. No one's allowed to talk about this case until after the trial. So fast forward basically almost 4 years, we go to trial and COVID is still somewhat a thing. And she says, we're closing the courtroom. No one's allowed in, including me. His wife was not allowed to go to court with him, not allowed to go to trial and sit there in support of her husband. So we got pushed into a room and we could watch the trial via Zoom. And throughout the trial, the judge would turn off the video feed and the audio feed. So making that a complete closure of the courtroom, which is a Sixth Amendment violation to his constitutional right. So we're watching the trial and the neighbor gets up to testify and he gets questioned about how he felt about police, how Parker felt about police. And the neighbor says he hates them. And the district attorney and the prosecution say, objection, objection, that's hearsay. Well, Nate, you and I are having a direct conversation right now. So if you or I were to talk about that, that would be a direct witness testimony. Mm-hmm. But if someone watching this was to talk about our conversation that we're having right now, that would be hearsay. Sure. And that's what they said that the neighbor had on Parker, which is false. It's a direct testimony. So the judge said, well, yeah, that's hearsay. We're not going to allow his testimony in. So she kicked the jury out of the courtroom, but the neighbor was allowed to talk to the court record. So if he's allowed to talk to the court record, in case this does go to an appeal, why can't he talk to the 12 people that are going to decide if Ben Darby's guilty of murder or not?
Right.
So that happens. Another witness who was he was a Huntsville Police Department training advisor at the training academy that Ben went through. And he had a real life event when he was on the street of a man. It was a domestic call out they had. And the guy was on his front porch with 2 long guns pointed at the ground. And Officer Moore got behind a position of cover and aimed his rifle at the guy, waiting for movement. And the guy was able to flick his wrist up and get a round off before Officer Moore could realize it. And he got shot in the face. Thankfully, it was birdshot and he survived. But he waited too long. And a lot of people say, well, Ben should have waited. You can't, like I demonstrated earlier, it's that quick.
Yeah, wait for what? Wait to get shot in the head?
For? Right. And Graham vs. Connor covers you for that. So Officer Moore's testimony wasn't allowed to come in. So he got on the screen, gets sworn in, and I know who he is, and I know what his testimony is going to be. So I'm excited to hear how that goes down. And then the screen gets cut off. No audio, no video. So then a couple minutes later, it comes back on and it's a brand new witness. And after that point of court, there's a break. And so I got to go talk to Ben and I said, what happened with Jason and the neighbor? And he said, the judge didn't allow them to testify because it spoke to the ultimate issue, which would have exonerated him. So they were allowed to talk to the court record, but they weren't allowed to tell the jury their testimony.
It doesn't make any sense to me at all. I mean, I'm not a legal expert by any means, when it comes to, courtroom procedure. But if it's allowed to be on the record, and like you said, in case of an appeal, why can't the jury hear it?
Right.
I guess that's my question.
Right.
But even with those things not being admitted, mm-hmm. Into the record for the jury, I'm still wondering how did they prove murder beyond a reasonable doubt? I don't even in just watching the body camera footage now, again, I've got 13 years law enforcement experience. And so I can look at a video like that and sort of pick it apart, which a lot of other people can't. Mm-hmm. But, I feel like, with Ben and his defense team probably would have been able to do that. I'm just wondering, what was it that the jury saw? What was it that the prosecution presented that proved their case beyond a reasonable doubt? I don't understand what that possibly could have been.
They never did. Every time that we would try to present something in favor of Ben, they would object and the judge would rule in their favor. Every time we would try to object to something the district attorney said and the prosecution said, she would rule in against us. And every time we had an objection, she ruled against our lawyers and always went inside of the prosecution. They said a lot of it was character assassination. They said that Ben should have never been a cop. They compared him to Derek Chauvin, which is two totally different situations.
Yeah.
They said that Ben was no different than Joe Blow walking down your street with a shotgun, busting into your house and shooting you. Frankly, there's a drastic difference between Ben Darby and Joe Blow, because Ben Darby's a trained police officer and Joe's not. They wouldn't allow case law into the trial. So Graham versus Connor, which is a bedrock case for police use of force,
right,
which states in the actual wording, it says police do not have to wait for the beat of the weapon to be pointed at them to protect or defend themselves of force against themselves or against another person. That wasn't allowed in. So the jury wasn't allowed to hear that case law, along with Montoot versus Carr and Grzycki versus Palm Beach Sheriff's Office. All three of those case laws would have exonerated Ben, but the jury wasn't allowed to hear it.
So the prosecution's case, I guess the success of their case hinged on, like you say, character assassination, just doing their best to make Ben look like a terrible human being,
mm-hmm.
and then preventing exculpatory evidence from being admitted. That's
right.
It?
Yeah.
I mean, were you did you hear any of the opening or closing arguments from the prosecution? Like, what? Again, this is so frustrating to me, because
mm-hmm.
this happens. There seems to be a trend of woke DAs prosecuting police officers
mm-hmm.
who have done their jobs the way they're trained to do them,
mm-hmm.
but will prosecute them anyway, and either fabricate a case against them, like they did with Officer Dagus in
yep.
La Mesa, California,
mm-hmm.
or like they did with Kyle Rittenhouse,
right?
Even though he wasn't a police officer. But I've never, in all of my years of law enforcement, I've been through several jury trials, and the standard has always been for the prosecution to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, even if the defense decides not to admit any evidence or call any witnesses to provide testimony. Based on everything that I saw, I mean, the jury instructions should have been very clear, right?
Mm-hmm.
As to, these are the elements of the crime that have to be met. This is the burden that the state has to meet in order to prove murder. In order for you to find a guilty verdict, this, and this all has to be met. And I just I wasn't there, I wasn't there for the trial, but I just don't see, based on everything that I've heard and everything that I've seen,
mm-hmm.
that there's any way for that prosecutor to meet the burden of proof for murder.
Right. So at the very beginning, when Ben was charged, between them talking about charging him and Ben getting charged, the DA's office went to the chief of police and said, hey, if you fire him, we won't charge him. Just fire him, get rid of him, and we're not going to press charges. And Chief McMurray said, no, I'm not going to do that. He did everything he was supposed to do. He followed department policy, state, local, federal law, all that stuff. He didn't do anything wrong. He saved 3 people's lives that day, including, his own and the other 2 officers.
Yeah.
And so they went back and forth, and then Ben got charged. And then January of 21, the attorneys for the prosecutor came over to our defense attorney and said, hey, we're going to offer Ben Darby a plea deal for aggravated manslaughter, no prison time, 5 years probation. See if he'll take it. Well, he didn't commit murder, and he surely didn't commit aggravated manslaughter.
Yeah.
The main difference being one's reckless and one's not.
So were like the chief and the people that were part of the use of force board or whatever that particular entity is called. Yeah. Were they allowed to testify during the trial?
I don't know exactly. The chief did not. One of the captains did. I don't know if he was on the review board or not.
Because it seems like that would have been appropriate. I mean, if you have a review board, a use of force board, or whatever you call it, that determined that Ben was within agency policy when he used force, that would be important for a jury to hear. Okay, well, why did they exonerate him? Why did they clear him? Why did police experts, right? I mean, I'm assuming that those people that comprise that review board or that use of force board had probably had quite a few years of experience amongst them, and could be considered expert witnesses. Why would these people feel like Ben was justified in doing what he did, but not the prosecutor? As a juror, I would be interested to hear that testimony.
Right. So that wasn't allowed.
Of course not.
It wasn't allowed because it spoke to the ultimate issue of his innocence. The fact that he didn't have to go through remedial training, the results of the incident review board, case law, testimony from the neighbor, testimony from the training instructor that trained Ben and several other academies after Ben's academy, none of that was allowed in.
I mean, you guys graduated from the academy, what, 2015?
16. July of 16. Yeah.
Okay. And I remember, and I'm sure training's probably changed. It's probably evolved. I went through the academy in 2006. But the same thing, we covered those exact type of scenarios all the time. Yeah. Like action versus reaction, you know, even if someone's holding a gun, you know, like this, and you're trying to talk to them, how quickly are you going to be able to react?
Right. I went through training in December. I went down South Alabama. I went to some training, and the guy was from up north. He had no idea who I was. It wasn't your average state your name and your department and where you're from, you know, beginning of the class. Yeah. And he goes into action. It was an officer survival class, and he goes into action versus reaction, and he's stating all this stuff. And I'm sitting there, I'm mad because it's like, we're still getting taught this, you know, that action is faster than reaction, and you cannot wait for the bad guy to act against you. And we got on a break, and some guy raised his hand, and he's like, well, up where we're from in Huntsville, Alabama, an officer is in prison now for doing exactly what you did. And no one knew who I was in the class, you know, and I was like, hey, if we're going to talk about that, that's my husband. So if you guys want to know what really happened and not what the news has been pushing, we'll talk about it. Yeah. But, you know, don't just, because the guy was trying to talk about it and he had stuff messed up because the news, you know, put out false information. But Alabama statute covers Ben. 13A323, I believe it is, states that if an officer is in fear of imminent danger, they can use force against the threat in front of them. And so about a month after Ben was sentenced and taken to prison, August 20th, 2021, mid-September, I went and spoke with our post commissioner. And I said, hey, do we still have 10 police academies in the state of Alabama? And he said, yes, we do. And I said, okay, are we still teaching brand new rookie cops that if they have a threat against them or another person in front of them, that they are allowed and they should eliminate that threat? And he said, yes, we're still teaching that. I said, then why is my husband in prison? Yeah. Because that's exactly what he did. That's what he was taught by post, by you guys at his academy, and then from an FBI survival class. And he's sitting in prison today. We're at month 11. July 20th will be month 11.
In prison for 11 months?
Yes.
Unbelievable.
Yes.
So
and the secretary said, I can't give you an answer.
Is there, and I'm assuming that there is, you're in the process of filing an appeal or, you know, okay. And like, what's the status on that? Do you have any idea how close you are, how close the defense team is to filing that?
So we have been filed since February of this year. Okay. And the district attorney of Madison County is no longer involved. The judge who was over his case is no longer involved. The state attorney general is. So his name is Steve Marshall, and he is now the prosecutor over Ben's case. Everyone has had their paperwork submitted since April, and we're waiting on the Court of Criminal Appeals to look at Ben's case and return a decision. But they have no timeline. There's no deadline for them. So they could look at it tomorrow. They could look at it next Easter, or they could look at it in 5 years. Whenever they feel like looking at it, they'll look at it. And because of Ben's sentencing, he has to sit day for day until that comes back. So Alabama murder statute minimum is 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And when they went to sentencing, the prosecutor was mad because Ben maintained his innocence, which he was, and they got mad about that. So they said, we recommend 25 years, which is over the minimum, which would not be, it would not make him eligible for an appeal bond. And the judge, this being her first criminal law case that she's ever presided over, took all the notes from the district attorney and the prosecutor. And then when we got up, so for the sentencing, I was allowed to be present for that because I testified for my husband. And the entire time, she didn't look at me or any of the other 5 witnesses that spoke for him. She swore us in and made eye contact. And as soon as we were done getting sworn in, she just looked down and didn't look at us, didn't give us the light of day.
So she was completely disinterested in your testimony.
Yes. Like it was a waste of time. It was a total waste of time. And so because they recommended 25 years and this being her first criminal law case, I really don't know what her mindset was. But she said, yeah, 25 years, send him off. So what's
this judge's name?
Donna Pate is her name.
Donna Pate. Okay. And what was the prosecutor's name?
The district attorney is Rob Broussard. And then the chief ADA is Tim Gann. And then Tim Douthit was his assistant.
Okay. Because I want people to have these names in case people feel like, emailing, calling, writing letters.
Oh, yeah.
And just telling people how shitty they are at their jobs and how they should not be practicing law and should be disbarred and, should be sued, frankly, because I'm sick of seeing this. I'm sick of seeing police officers prosecuted, and the people that come to their defense, the people who, like you say, have exculpatory evidence, the people who can testify and vouch for their character, when a prosecutor who has no idea who Ben is, has never had a conversation with him probably, decides to just drag his character through the mud in the middle of a trial, yet someone who does know Ben and who has spent years with him, getting to know him, or maybe not even years, but somebody who's worked with him, those types of people aren't allowed to testify.
Right. And there's bad blood between the district attorney's office and Huntsville Police Department for multiple reasons. And they made Ben a political football because there was 5 other shootings after Ben. And I'm thankful because all those officers did exactly what they were supposed to do. But none of them are doing this. And I'm not asking for that. But when one of them is a suicide by cop scenario and is very similar to Ben's case in the fact that they had a weapon and it was on their person and they reached for it. And before she even touched it, she got smoked. That's okay. Which by training, yes, that's absolutely okay. The officers were correct. But what's the difference between reaching for a gun in my waistband and going like that?
Yeah.
There's none.
Except that even a greater level of danger because he's already got the gun in his hand. He's already
right.
Like
this guy's going to get the shot off before she can reach it and put it at you.
Takes a split second. That's what people don't understand. And man, I wish I could have been a fly on the wall in that courtroom during that trial.
Me too.
Yeah, I bet you do. And that's amazing just astonishing that you weren't allowed to be in the courtroom supporting your husband. Who gives a shit about COVID at this point?
Yeah.
It's very suspicious the way they handled this case with the way they kept it secret and, a completely closed trial. I don't know. It seems to me that the AG's office or somebody needs to investigate all of these actors, all of these courtroom actors involved, the district attorney, the judge. Something just doesn't sit right. Something doesn't compute with the way that trial played out.
And what I met with the attorney general a week after Ben was sentenced. He was in Huntsville and at a Back the Blue police rally event thing. And I thought, well, I got to go and see if I can talk to him, and I know ethically he can't talk to me about the case because now he's the prosecutor, but I wasn't going to let it pass by that he's 20 minutes from my house. So I go to the thing And I walked up to him afterwards and I said, "Hey, Mr. Attorney General, my name is Keelin Darby. I'm a police officer at this agency. And my husband is Ben Darby, the former Huntsville police officer who's now sitting in prison for doing his job. And now that you're the prosecutor and you back police like you just told us all that you did, I need you to do something about it."
Mm-hmm.
And we have these little business cards, and I had given him one. And he looked at it and looked down at the ground. And Chief McMurray was nearby, the Huntsville police chief, Ben's chief, and he was talking to the Attorney General with me. And the Attorney General looked up and he said, "You're a cop too?" And I said, "Yes, sir. So not only is this affecting me personally because that's my husband, but when I go to work tonight, this is going to affect me professionally, because if I go out and do exactly what he did, am I going to go to jail too?"
Right.
And he looked at me and he said, "Well, thank you for introducing yourself." And that was that, which is fine, but I wasn't going to let that FaceTime go away.
I wouldn't either.
Knowing that he's the boss now on the prosecutor side.
Yeah. Well, no, that's great that you took advantage of that opportunity, because you may never have had it again.
Right.
And I'm so sorry for this. I mean, this has got to be just probably the worst time of your life, knowing that your husband is sitting in prison for a crime he didn't commit, for doing his job, for protecting other officers, for protecting himself. I hope you have a good support system around you. I hope you have family and friends and people that are supportive. Because again, I can't imagine what you're going through.
Yeah, I do. People from my department, Huntsville Police Department, family, friends, church family. There's not a day that goes by that someone doesn't call or text me to check in on me, bring me something. "Hey, do you want to come and do this with us? Hey, here's some money for whatever, legal fees, groceries, fill in the blank." Most people see this for what this is.
Well, I certainly hope so, because it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out, to know what's going on.
Right.
Murder. I mean, give me a break. Like you said, if they wanted to pursue, like you said, aggravated manslaughter or some sort of lesser included offense.
Right.
But to pursue murder charges and to actually be able to prove it is just a stretch that I can't even imagine how the jury connected those dots. I just can't.
And the jury, so they asked for a lesser offense. They said, "Is there something else we can charge him with?" And they were told, "No, it's murder or it's nothing." So that raises a question to me. They didn't want to charge him with murder, but that was the only choice that they were given. And then jury deliberations were a day and a half long. When we came back Friday morning, one of the jurors was dismissed because she had a panic attack. Now, I'm not saying this is a conspiracy, but why was she having a panic attack? Was she the one holdout saying, "No, he's not guilty of murder. You guys are wrong"? And then she got pressured so hard that she had a panic attack and had to go to the hospital. So then they had to restart deliberations with the juror replacement. And then 3 hours later, yeah, he's guilty. But Ben said that when they read off their findings, no one in the jury would look at him. All the girls were crying. Like, if I'm going to send someone to jail for 25 years or up to 20 years to life for murder, I'm not going to cry about it. If I know that they did it, if the facts prove that he's a true murderer, I'm not going to be crying and feel sorry for the guy. It's like, that's what you get. But
sounds like maybe there were a couple bullies on that jury.
Yeah.
And some
prove
jurors
that.
were pressured. Yeah, you can't prove it because you don't know what's going on inside the jury room.
Right.
But I mean, if you've got a woman who's having a panic attack because she doesn't want to render a guilty verdict or whatever the case is, and you have other people crying as the verdict is being read, then like you said, yeah, something's wrong. If you have someone who beyond a reasonable doubt committed a murder and deserves to go to prison for 25 years, why are you crying about it?
Exactly.
So that's a really good point. What prison facility has Ben in currently, and can people send mail, send letters, of encouragement and support? And
so I screen everything because I don't want him getting hate mail, because he's in bad enough conditions as it is.
Yeah.
So people can go to our website and sign up for a newsletter, and they can communicate with him that way if they wish to. It's standwithdarby.com.
Okay.
But he is at Limestone Correctional, and it's about an hour from where we live. So just in May, they started opening up visitation. So I went 10 months without seeing him because of COVID and lack of manpower. So when he was first arrested, after sentencing, he was in solitary confinement for 40 days. Had no contact with anyone except
Why was he in why was he there? Why is he in solitary confinement?
So originally he started off at Madison County Jail, and they didn't have a protective custody unit. So because he's a police officer, he's not going to go to general population.
Sure.
So all they had was solitary. So he was in solitary 23 hours a day, and he would get a 1 hour break, and he would call me, and then he would call his parents. And then he got moved to Kilby, which is the state processing center. And I went every 4 days from hearing from him. And when he was able to call me, he got 15 minutes, and they told him, you can either call your family member or you can take a shower, but those are your choices, and you have 15 minutes to do it. Go.
Wow. That's unbelievable.
Just the conditions that he's in right now, especially he's innocent. He shouldn't even be there.
Yeah.
So that's even more maddening. There's rats in his cell. There's inmate on inmate assaults. Even in where he's at in protective custody, he has to watch his back.
Good grief. When was the last time you saw him? When was the last time you got to visit him?
This past June. So I'm actually going to see him Saturday, on the 2nd.
Okay.
So
you're going to see him. So let's see when, you said
I'll see him this Saturday.
You'll see him this Saturday. When was the last time you saw him? How many days has it been?
June, the first Sunday in June, whatever that was.
So it's been a minute.
I get to see him once a month, as long as the prison doesn't cancel it. God, so it's once a month. So hard. Now. Yeah, it's horrible.
That's all you're allowed is one visit a month.
It's one visit a month, and he gets up to 4 visitors at a time. So it's not like I get my own visitation with him, and then his parents can come in and see him for their visitation. We all have to go together. And you get 2 hours, but you really only get an hour and 45 minutes, because you have to come in and get searched and make sure you're not doing anything wrong. Right. And, you're not wearing anything wrong or whatever. And then they allow you to go in.
My goodness, that is just awful. It's a nightmare.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a nightmare. And it's not a matter of if he's going to come home. It's a matter of when, because case law is on his side. And if the trial was conducted correctly and people were allowed to do what they should have been allowed to testify to, he wouldn't be in prison today. Absolutely. I know that is 100% truth.
On your website, is there information where people can send correspondence to the Court of Appeals to pressure them to hear this case sooner?
No, I don't have that up there, but I could put that up there for people if they wanted to do that. It's the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals in Montgomery. I know that off the top of my head. If people want to just search that, and then I can work on getting that up on the website. But yeah, people can write them, or people can write the Attorney General, because the Attorney General says he supports law enforcement, yet there's an innocent cop sitting in one of the worst prisons in Alabama for doing his job.
I imagine if you put that information on your website, because what I'll do is I'll put the link for the website in the description, and I'll put the link for the Pipe Hitter Foundation campaign, which we'll talk about in a second.
Yeah.
But if people put enough pressure on these politicians and these judges and these courts to say, hey, listen, we want this case heard, we want this settled, we want this resolved. This man's been sitting in prison for 11 months for a crime he didn't commit. You guys need to get your shit together.
Yeah.
And hopefully that will have an effect. Hopefully that, that will have an influence on them hearing his case sooner. I hope.
Yeah. That's, with Pipe Hitter, they came on and been a big help to us financially, but also in media advocacy and getting us the opportunities to speak with people like you and others to tell Ben's story, because there's a gag order for 3 years. So if I were to do this, 3 years ago, I would be in jail.
Yeah.
So when the trial was over with, the judge gave the all clear. Our attorneys asked that we waited until our stuff got filed just for appeal's sake.
Sure.
And I said, that's fine. And as soon as they gave me the green light, I hit the ground running,
Oh,
because
absolutely.
he doesn't need to
Absolutely.
be there.
So the Pipe Hitter Foundation,
Mhm.
I know people can go to the Pipe Hitter. It's pipehitterfoundation.org.
Yes.
And then look up Ben Darby.
Yes,
And
he
look
should be
up
right
his-
there on the main screen. It's his picture and it has his name on it. And there's a brief description. And then I think you can click to donate to help with our legal fees. And then also to find out more information about him.
Because the legal fees are astronomical at this point, I'm sure,
Yeah.
with as many years as you've been at this. So for you folks watching and listening, please go to pipehitterfoundation.org, look up look up his account, make a donation. Doesn't matter how small, everything helps. And, a lot of my listeners know, because a lot of them are supporters of law enforcement. They know when things like this happen that the legal fees just will drain you. They'll bankrupt you. So please consider making a donation. They need all the help they can possibly get with this. And also consider going to the website where there will eventually be information for people that you can contact, whether through email, telephone, whatever, the Court of Appeals, the Attorney General, and put pressure on these people to do their jobs, to hear this case, to get it resolved, because Ben does not need to sit in prison for any day longer than he already has. So what else, Keelin? Anything else that you need people to know?
I'm trying to think.
And if there isn't, that's okay. We can always do a follow-up if more information.
Yeah, I think
comes up.
I hit all the high points. Basically his Sixth Amendment constitutional right was violated. Case law wasn't allowed in. Other exculpatory evidence being witnesses and training material and the incident review board wasn't allowed in.
It just sounds like they had their minds made up about this case before the trial even started, and they were just trying to expedite a guilty verdict is what they were trying to do.
I mean, they never proved the prima facie of murder at all. Like, and our defense attorney got up and I don't know if it's objected or what, but said, they didn't prove murder. So, suspend this proceeding. Right. And she said no. We gave 33. So we filed a motion for a new trial and we gave 33 reasons for that. And she denied the motion and said, I'm not going to look at it. I do want to add the National Fraternal Order of Police supports Ben and backs Ben, which is a big deal because they're the biggest law enforcement agency or organization in the country.
Yeah.
And, like I've said this several times, if the chief of police supports you and the mayor and the city council and the FOP, it's not murder. Because if he was wrong, they would have cut him loose immediately. They wouldn't have helped him. They paid for his initial trial. They paid for all that. Thank God, because that was $125,000. We're in a six-figure digit right now in legal fees, just for the appeal.
I'm sure. Which agency did the criminal investigation?
Huntsville Police Department.
So they did the internal review and the criminal.
Yeah, and which that doesn't happen anymore because of this case. But the lead investigator now works for the district attorney.
And he was working for the Huntsville Police Department.
At the time of the incident, he was a Huntsville police detective.
So was he the one that essentially submitted the probable cause affidavit and all the paperwork to support charging Ben?
I believe so. I don't know that as a fact, but I know that he was the one that interviewed Ben. And off record, so that he interviewed Ben gave his testimony, and thinking that he was talking to a cop. Yes, he knew, like, he got Mirandized, but he was talking to a fellow officer. And they got done with the interview, and Vogel is his name, told Ben off record, don't let anyone Monday morning quarterback you. You did exactly what you should have done. And then 6 months later, he's charged with murder.
I'm curious.
And
That'd be really,
and then 4 years later, he now works for the district attorney.
yeah. See, that makes this whole thing stink even worse.
Yeah.
I'd be really curious to know what sort of conversation that detective had with the prosecutor, and how much influence the prosecutor had over his investigation.
Yeah. And we all know you can indict a ham sandwich. Like getting a grand jury indictment is not a big deal.
It's not
like,
hard.
No, it's not hard at all. But from people that I've heard, after they had testified at grand jury, there is not a shadow of a doubt that Ben was innocent. And then the DA got a hold of them and held them over for an extended amount of time. And I don't know what was said, but they changed their mind and decided to indict him.
Did this detective testify at the trial?
He did. Yeah.
And did you hear any of that testimony?
I did. It's been 4 years, so I don't remember exactly what happened.
Sure.
But he testified against Ben. I mean, he and the female officer testified against Ben. The male officer testified for Ben, which was good, obviously, because he was a prosecutor's witness.
Yeah.
So the lead prosecutor and Beckles kind of got into it on the stand because they wanted Beckles to say Ben did wrong, and Beckles said no, he didn't. Beckles testified that he was pulling the slack out of his trigger and Ben beat him to breaking the shot. Beckles testified also that it was inevitable that the guy was going to die either by his own hand or by an officer's hand that day.
Yeah. Well, and he definitely, like I said, this was, suicide by cop all the way. There's really no way to slice it.
Right.
Again, with the 911 call, leaving the front door open, refusing to put his gun down. He wanted to die that day. He just didn't want to do it himself.
Right. And during the I don't know if you could hear it on the 911 call, but the dispatcher, he says his deal, and then dispatcher says, "Hold on, I'm going to get you some help." And he says, "No, thanks," and hangs up. So there's your first, I don't want help. I just want someone to come and kill me.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're going to commit suicide, listen, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a mental health expert, but I've done this for long enough to know, and I've investigated plenty of suicides. If someone is committed to suiciding themselves, they're not going to make a phone call. They're not going to tell someone who's possibly going to come intervene. They're just going to go do it. Like I said, he just didn't want to do it himself. He wanted the cops to do it that day.
Right. Exactly.
I'm so sorry for everything that you're going through. This has got to be just your worst nightmare. But you're still active duty and you're still going to work like you're supposed to, like you're scheduled to. Yeah.
Yeah. I obviously took time off after sentencing because I wasn't in the right state of mind for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But I went back to work, and it was awkward at first, because everyone, it's an awkward situation,
Yeah, well, yeah.
I had people come up and cry and, hug me and, "Hey, we're praying for you and we support you," to someone rounded the corner and getting the deer in headlights look like, "Oh, what do I do?"
Yeah, sure. I can't imagine it would be easy to know what to say.
Right.
After
and
that.
then, you get the 1% of morons who think that Ben did the wrong thing and decide that it's correct for them to voice their opinion to me while I'm trying to, get back on my feet and survive a life crisis, and they were very quickly told to go walk off a short dock,
Yeah.
But for the most part, I've had a lot of support. You're going to have your haters. That's life.
Yeah.
But 99% of the people out there see this for what this is, how it's a political sham, and he's being used for something that's outside of our control right now.
Well, when you see Ben on Saturday,
Yeah.
Tell him I'm thinking about him. Tell him I'm rooting for him. Tell him I'm going to get this message out to as many people as I possibly can. Encourage people to share this video, share the links, and do whatever they can to support him and, to help with his cause. Like I said, I want the appellate court to hear this case as quickly as possible, because I can't imagine sitting in prison, not being able to see your wife for months at a time. Just has to be excruciating.
Yeah, it's horrible. He was very excited to hear So I can't tell him everything on the phone because it's recorded.
Yeah.
So these visits that we have, it's just a dump of information because I can talk freely to him.
Yeah.
And he knows that I had an interview today, but he doesn't know who with, because I didn't want to. I mean, it's going to come out eventually when you put this out.
Yeah.
But pre-game, I don't want to, skew anything.
Sure.
So I've had when Pipe Hitter picked this up, and I was able to tell him in a concealed way. We were just beyond ecstatic, like just so grateful for their support, because Eddie went through a similar thing in being wrongfully in prison for months for a crime he didn't commit. Ben's in prison right now at 11 months, or it'll be 11 months for a crime he didn't commit. So to get their support and their backing, it was just huge.
Yeah.
And it's something that we had prayed for over a year. And then I got the phone call and just, I lost it, because it's like, if this is really happening, like people are getting on board and they see that this is a miscarriage of justice.
Yeah. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Pipe Hitter Foundation, it's not like GoFundMe. GoFundMe is a very, it's a very liberal site. Pipe Hitter Foundation accommodates law enforcement. They accommodate military. And so I'm glad they picked it up too. And I'm glad, Mary reached out to me, and told me about this, because this, again, it's so heinous what they're doing to your husband and what they're doing to other police officers who find themselves in similar situations. Why the fuck would anybody want to go to work as a police officer knowing that if they're protecting themselves from a very clear and present imminent threat against your life, that you might go to prison for defending yourself?
Yeah. And I can guarantee you, like, I know this for a fact, proactive policing in North Alabama stopped. Like, it was non-existent at his department.
I don't blame any one of them.
Yeah. Oh, me neither. I mean, when I went back to work, I went and I clocked in and I clocked out. I wasn't beating down the bushes trying to find bad guys. And a lot of people weren't.
Again, I why would you? What? Because it's a roll of the dice. You do your job, and God forbid you have to use any level of force, and then next thing you know, your job is on the line, and you might be looking at prosecution.
Right.
So I can't. That needs to be resolved, because the taxpayers down there are suffering from it too. Because proactive policing is important. Going out and catching the bad guys is important. But if police officers have to be worried about losing their livelihoods and losing their freedom, then the taxpayers suffer, the good, decent, hardworking citizens that count on the police to protect them. So it's not just about the police. It's about every other decent human being that lives in that community.
Right. Exactly.
So, folks, go visit the links in the description. Make a donation to the Pipe Hitter Foundation on behalf of Ben, and flood the appellate court's office with emails and phone calls. Flood the attorney general's office with emails and phone calls and letters, and let's see if we can't influence them to hear this case, so that Ben can get out of prison and be reunited with his wife. So, Keelin, I appreciate you coming on today, and let's catch up again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nate. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.